let's return to the subject which we started the show, not defence spending, but this trip from Emmanuel Macron to Washington, D.C. Simon Marks is LBC's Washington correspondent and joins me now. Pretty brave to grab Donald Trump's hand and to effectively tell him off, wasn't it, Simon? Good evening.
I think so too, Henry. I should tell you that when I was in school, we had a school trip one day to the newsroom of the Hendon and Finchley Times.
Wow.
And look what happened to me. Now I get to spend a day in Washington, D.C. watching Emmanuel Macron trying to play President Donald Trump like a violin, because that's very much what he did here today. I mean, this was obviously, treacherous for the French president. Remember that, there was once a thought that Prime Minister Keir Starmer might be the first European leader to cross the threshold of the White House during Trump's second term. But we now know that's not going to happen until Thursday. So Macron was here today really softening up the ground, I think, for the Prime Minister. And on two separate occasions today, portrayed France and the UK as being joined at the hip in terms of their approach to Ukraine and the peacekeeping operation that will need to take place if and when any kind of final agreement to end the war is reached. He was definitely, Emmanuel Macron, at pains to point out to Donald Trump that the Prime Minister has said that he may be willing to deploy UK troops into some kind of a peacekeeping force of European and non-European members, but only if the United States provides a backstop. Now, President Macron, who at times today flattered his American host, at other times cajoled him, and the rest of the time tried to get some strategic engagement out of Donald Trump, described today's meetings as a turning point. He said that substantive steps had been taken and that he believed that he made progress on the issue of security guarantees, although every time at two separate media appearances today when Donald Trump was asked exactly what kind of security guarantees he's prepared to offer Ukraine, he danced around the issue and did not answer the question directly. So it's hard to be absolutely certain that this issue is resolved. One issue that President Trump says is going to be resolved very soon is the United States' effort to secure access to some of Ukraine's valuable rare earth minerals. And the American president took us all by surprise this morning by announcing that an agreement between Washington and Kiev is almost completed.
I will be meeting with President Zelensky. In fact, he may come in this week or next week to sign the agreement, and which would be nice. I'd love to meet him. Would meet at the Oval Office. So the agreement's being worked on now. They're very close to a final deal. It'll be a deal with rare earths and various other things, and he would like to come, as I understand it, here to sign it, and that would be great with me. I think they then have to get it approved by their council or whoever might approve it, but I'm sure that will happen.
Zelensky coming to Washington would be great with me, said the American president of a man that last week he branded a dictator in Ukraine. Let's see if that deal really is nearly completed or whether the president's comments in any way were designed to put fresh pressure on Volodymyr Zelensky. The pressure today on Donald Trump came from Emmanuel Macron, who basically schooled Donald Trump and reminded him that Russia is the aggressor in this conflict, coming hours after Trump refused to allow the G7 to issue a statement describing Russian aggression against Ukraine, and hours after the United States ambassador to the United Nations voted no at the General Assembly and failed to support a motion criticizing Russia for illegally invading Ukraine 3 years ago today. On the subject of compensation for the United States, Macron said, well, hang on a second, the people who really ought to be compensated first are not the Americans, but the Ukrainians.
I support the idea to have Ukraine first being compensated because they are the ones who have lose a lot of their fellow citizens and being destroyed by these attacks. Second, all of those who paid for will be compensated, but not by Ukraine, by Russia, because they were the one to aggress.
And so what Mr. Macron was saying there was that it's Russia that should be providing compensation to the European Union, to the United States, and that the European Union is sitting on $350 billion worth of frozen Russian assets that he thinks ought to be discussed as part of a possible compensation plan. But of course, Donald Trump didn't take him up on that idea because he is very busy coveting a geopolitical and an economic relationship with Russia that he referenced today. Things got sufficiently tense that at one point during the press conference this evening, Macron said to Donald Trump, this peace agreement must not mean in any way that Ukraine is engaging in any kind of act of surrender. So there are still huge differences for the Prime Minister to deal with when he gets here on Thursday. But I think certainly at number 10, they're probably watching all of the body language and the mood music as they try to determine exactly what sort of strategy the Prime Minister is going to deploy when he follows in Macron's footsteps.
And in terms of that minerals deal, I was reading Ukraine has about 5% of the world's critical raw materials. Do we know where this came from? Because there was some suggestion right at the start that Volodymyr Zelensky said he was open to looking at minerals, and then Donald Trump has really taken that and run, so much so that President Zelensky is clearly very upset by some of the deals that have been offered.
Yeah, that is correct, Henry. That telling of the story is right. The idea was first proposed to Donald Trump by Volodymyr Zelensky in a conversation that they had before the inauguration, when Donald Trump was still president-elect of the United States. And I think back in Kiev, Ukrainian officials regret that. And some of them feel that Zelensky overplayed his hand and didn't quite realize the extent to which Donald Trump, you know, always the transactional deal maker with an eye on the bottom line, was going to take the idea and absolutely run with it. I mean, I think Zelensky was imagining more of a cooperative approach to this, but Donald Trump, you know, the sort of Tony Soprano on the world stage said, oh, rare earths that could sustain America's need for lithium and other valuable minerals for the next quarter of a century? Yes, please, we'll grab them. And so I think he's been a bit outpaced by Donald Trump on that, Volodymyr Zelensky. But look, when the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, went to Kiev a few days ago and shoved this piece of paper under Zelensky's nose and said, sign this, and Zelensky said, stuff it, that was because the paper that he was being presented with did not contain any security guarantees as part of this arrangement. So it's all about security guarantees. I'll just make one other point very quickly. There's an FT article, an editorial written by the Treasury Secretary that was published in the Monday edition of the paper, in which the Treasury Secretary says after this deal is signed, the United States will exercise governance over Ukraine's reconstruction, and that it will have sort of the good housekeeping seal of approval because everybody will know that because the United States is involved, there will be total transparency, accountability, and absolutely no corruption because the United States has led anti-corruption efforts around the world. This is the Treasury Secretary in the same Trump administration that on day one of Attorney General Pam Bondi's time at the Department of Justice, the first thing she did was gut the enforcement of criminal statutes that are anti-corruption in the United States. So on the one hand, you've got a government here saying we're only now going to prosecute the most egregious corruption crimes that we come across. Day-to-day stuff we're going to forget all about. Don't even attempt to enforce it, she's told Department of Justice prosecutors. But on the other hand, you've got the Treasury Secretary saying to Europe, well, we should be put in charge of Ukraine reconstruction because we can guarantee things won't be corrupt. I don't think so.
Lastly, Simon, in terms of the visit on Thursday, do we know what we're expecting? Is it going to be a sort of press conference style event that President Trump had with Emmanuel Macron today? Are we expecting the same with Keir Starmer?
Well, provided the British side agrees, I am absolutely sure that is what the American side will want. And one of the things that they need to be looking at carefully in number 10 is what happened to Macron this morning in the Oval Office before the bilateral talks and the press conference. Because Donald Trump now has this habit of turning those routine photo ops where, you know, the president says nice things about his guest says nice things about the president, and then the cameras get ordered out of the room so they can go on with the meeting. Trump turns those into mini press conferences, and you could see etched on Macron's face I think, a degree of anger, but also consternation that while he was sitting there waiting to get on with these most consequential talks since 1945 that any European leader has held with an American president, the American president just decided that he was going to shoot the breeze with the press. And I think it lasted, it went on for at least 25, maybe 30 minutes. So that then eats into the time that is set aside for the talks. And of course, who knows in those settings what Trump is going to say. What he said this morning was Zelensky's coming here to sign a deal about minerals. So if it follows the pattern of today, and today seems to be the new normal at the White House, there will be a photo op. Trump will take questions at it. Some of them will be addressed to the Prime Minister. Then they'll go off into talks, and then there'll be a press conference afterwards at which everybody gets another crack at both of them. So this is going to require, for any leader coming here, really fancy footwork. You've got to be fast on your feet because literally, it's only Monday night. Who knows where we're going to be by Thursday, the way this crowd behaves.
Thank you, Simon. Simon Marks, LBC's Washington correspondent. I suspect we'll be coming back to Ukraine tomorrow and later this week.